The champagne flute shattered against my uniform, the crystal pieces catching the light like fallen stars across the marble floor. The smell of Dom Perignon mixed with industrial bleach from my cleaning supplies. Marcus's laugh echoed through the penthouse as amber liquid dripped from my chin onto the Persian rug I'd spent 3 hours steam cleaning that morning. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Clumsy as always, he said, adjusting his Armani cufflinks. That's what happens when you let the help serve drinks at a real party. I stood frozen, champagne staining my gray cleaning uniform, surrounded by his colleagues from Davidson, Pierce and Associates. Their uncomfortable silence stretched like a held breath. The same men who'd shaken my hand in boardrooms just months ago now avoided my eyes, seeing only what Marcus wanted them to see. A maid. Nothing more. My sister Rachel giggled from the leather sectional, her manicured fingers wrapped around her own glass. Oh Marcus, you're terrible. But honestly, Jonna, maybe stick to what you know best. She gestured toward the vacuum cleaner. Leaning against the wall like an accusation, the irony burned hotter than the champagne still stinging my eyes. These same people would be sitting in my boardroom tomorrow morning, though none of them knew it yet. The signed contracts were locked in my briefcase 3 floors below, the keys to my Tesla dangling from the chain around my neck, hidden beneath the polyester collar of a uniform I'd worn for exactly 14 days. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to that condescending whisper he used when he thought he was being kind. Look, I get it. You're embarrassed about the whole cleaning thing. But honey, there's no shame in honest work. Not everyone can be corporate material like your sister. The word honey hit like a slap. This man who'd called me Dr. Chen in meetings for 3 years, who'd praised my market analysis reports, who'd fought to get me promoted to senior associate before everything changed. Before the scandal that wasn't a scandal. Before the lies that became truth and family whispers. I bent down slowly, picking up the largest piece of crystal, feeling its sharp edge against my palm. The fragment reflected the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 43 floors up, Manhattan spread below us like a circuit board, each light representing someone's ambition, someone's dreams, someone's carefully constructed life that could crumble with a single phone call. You know what, Marcus? I stood up, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. You're absolutely right. I should stick to what I know best. He smiled that patronizing smile, the one Rachel had fallen in love with at their college reunion. The smile that had convinced my family I was jealous of their success, bitter about my own failures. The smile that had made me invisible in my own life. Glad you're finally being reasonable, he said, turning back to his guests. Now, could you grab some towels from the kitchen? This mess isn't going to clean itself. I looked at the broken glass scattered across imported marble, each piece reflecting a different angle of the same lie. Tomorrow morning, Marcus would walk into Davidson, Pierce and Associates' corner conference room for the quarterly partners meeting. He'd take his usual seat at the mahogany table, open his leather portfolio, and wait for Director Harrison to announce the new senior partner acquisition that would reshape the firm's entire corporate structure. He'd expect to see his golf buddy Peterson, maybe Harrison's protege Williams. He'd never expect to see his wife's sister walk through those doors in a tailored Valentino suit, carrying the signed merger documents that made her the youngest equity partner in the firm's 70-year history. The champagne had stopped dripping, but I could still taste it on my lips. Sweet at first, then bitter. Like secrets that had been aging too long in dark places. I picked up my cleaning supplies, the plastic caddy rattling as I moved toward the kitchen. Behind me, Marcus launched into another story about closing deals and power lunches, his voice carrying that particular timbre of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. His colleagues laughed at the appropriate moments, their attention already shifting away from the help who'd caused such a minor disruption. In the pristine kitchen, I set down my supplies and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Director Harrison, 2 from the legal team, and 17 text messages from colleagues who had no idea where I'd disappeared to for the past 2 weeks. The latest message was timestamped 20 minutes ago. Jonna, the Times wants to do a feature on the merger. Photo shoot Tuesday. Hope you're ready for the spotlight. I deleted it without responding, just like I'd ignored all the others. Tomorrow will come whether I was ready or not. The kitchen faucet dripped steadily, each drop hitting the stainless steel sink with mechanical precision. Drip, drip, drip. Like a countdown that no one else could hear. I opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out a roll of paper towels, my movements automatic after 2 weeks of playing this role. Through the archway, I could see Rachel showing off her engagement ring to Marcus's secretary, the diamond, catching the light as she gestured. The same light that had caught the champagne glass before it shattered. Everything in this apartment was designed to catch light, to sparkle, to demand attention. Everything except me. I walked back into the living room, paper towels in hand, and knelt beside the broken glass. The conversation continued above me, voices blending into background noise as I carefully picked up each fragment. A discussion about market volatility. Someone mentioned the Davidson merger that was shaking up the whole industry. Marcus agreed that these corporate shakeups always create opportunities for the right people. If only he knew, the last piece of crystal was wedged under the coffee table, a tiny shard that would have been easy to miss. But I'd learned not to leave things unfinished. Each fragment went into the paper towel, wrapped carefully so no one would cut themselves on the disposal. All done, I said, standing up with the bundled glass in my hands. Marcus didn't look up from his conversation about quarterly projections. Kitchen trash, he said dismissively, waving in the general direction of where I should disappear. I walked back to the kitchen, deposited the broken glass, and began packing up my cleaning supplies. The leather portfolio Marcus had been carrying sat on the counter where he'd left it, unzipped and vulnerable. Inside, I could see the edge of a document with the Davidson, Pierce and Associates letterhead. Something about preliminary partnership considerations and candidate evaluations. My candidate evaluation. The one where Marcus had written, lacks the killer instinct necessary for senior management positions, and better suited for support roles despite technical competency. The evaluation that had mysteriously surfaced during my review process, undermining 3 years of exemplary performance ratings. I zipped the portfolio closed without touching it. Some secrets were better left undisturbed until the right moment. The laughter from the living room grew louder, punctuated by the clink of fresh champagne glasses. Rachel's voice rose above the others, telling the story of how she and Marcus met, how he'd rescued her from a boring corporate life and showed her what real success looked like. How her sister had never quite figured out how to make it in the real world. I picked up my cleaning caddy and walked toward the front door, my footsteps silent on the thick carpeting. No one called goodbye. No one acknowledged my leaving. I was just the help, after all, invisible until needed, forgotten the moment the job was done. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. Gray uniform, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except for the simple chain around my neck. I looked exactly like what they expected to see. Exactly like what I'd needed them to see. The elevator descended through 43 floors of carefully constructed lives, each number lighting up and disappearing as we passed. 42. 41. 40. Each floor represents someone's version of success, someone's definition of power, someone's understanding of worth. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. At the ground floor, the doors opened onto the marble lobby where I'd once walked in heels that clicked with confidence, where doormen had known my name and called me Dr. Chen with respect. Now they barely glanced up as the maid walked past with her bucket and mop. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening energy. People rushing home from offices, from meetings, from lives that mattered. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found the number I needed. Director Harrison's office. This is Jonna Chen. I need to confirm tomorrow's 9 a.m. meeting time. Dr. Chen. We've been trying to reach you. The partnership announcement is scheduled for 9:15, right after the quarterly review. The press release goes out at 10:30. Are you ready for this? I looked up at the penthouse windows 43 floors above, where warm light spilled out into the darkness. Where Marcus was probably still holding court, still believing he understood how the world worked, still convinced that people like me knew our place. I'm ready, I said, ending the call. The Tesla's engine started with barely a whisper, German engineering at its finest. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of the building in my rearview mirror. Tomorrow, everything will change. But tonight, I was still just the maid who'd cleaned up someone else's mess and disappeared without a word. The champagne smell had faded from my uniform, but I could still taste it. Sweet at first, then bitter. Like justice that had been aging. In dark places, waiting for the right moment to breathe, the smell of bleach still lingered on my hands as I sat in my car outside the 24-hour diner on Lexington Avenue. Through the fogged windows, I could see Marcus and Rachel 15 years ago, celebrating her college graduation at this same booth. Back then, I'd been the proud big sister, fresh out of Harvard Business School, wearing my first power suit and paying for dinner with my signing bonus from Peterson and Associates. You're going to change the world, Rachel had said that night, her eyes bright with admiration. I want to be just like you when I grow up. Now she was 28, married to a man who treated her sister like hired help, and convinced that success meant never getting your own hands dirty. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a careful erosion, like waves wearing down a cliff face until only fragments remained. I pulled up the photo on my phone from that graduation dinner. Three faces smiling at the camera. Rachel in her cap and gown, me in my interview suit, and Marcus in his fraternity jacket, already calculating even then. His arm around Rachel's shoulders, but his eyes focused somewhere just over the camera, as if he were looking toward a future that didn't include inconvenient family members. The pattern started small. Missed birthdays because of important client dinners. Family gatherings where Marcus would steer conversations away from my career achievements and toward Rachel's wedding planning. Comments about how some people are just more naturally suited for corporate life, while I was standing right there. But the real shift came 3 years ago, when Davidson, Pierce and Associates announced they were acquiring Peterson and Associates in the largest corporate merger of the decade. I'd been working on the acquisition from Peterson's side, spending 18-hour days structuring the deal, analyzing market positions, and ensuring regulatory compliance. My fingerprints were on every page of that contract. Then Marcus started asking questions. Innocent questions, or so they seemed. How was the merger progressing? What were the sticking points? Which Peterson executives were likely to survive the transition? I'd answered because he was family, because Rachel trusted him, because corporate lawyers were supposed to understand confidentiality. I should have known better. The breach of confidentiality allegation came exactly 2 weeks before the merger was finalized. Someone had leaked sensitive Peterson financial data to a competitor, information that only 3 people had access to: myself, my direct supervisor, and the compliance officer. The investigation was swift, thorough, and devastating. My supervisor had been with the firm for 23 years. The compliance officer was the managing partner's nephew. That left me. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. The leak had come from my secure login credentials, during a time window when I'd supposedly been logged into the system from 2 different locations simultaneously. My explanations about shared computers and automatic logout failures fell on deaf ears. Corporate security concluded that either I was criminally negligent with my access codes, or deliberately complicit in corporate espionage. Neither option was career-friendly. The settlement was generous, legally speaking. No criminal charges, a glowing recommendation letter, and enough severance to buy silence about the whole unfortunate situation. But in the tight-knit world of corporate law, silence was just another word for guilt. Word spread through informal networks. Jonathan? Brilliant analyst, but there were some security issues at her last firm. Nothing proven, of course, but why take the risk? For 6 months, I lived off my severance while sending out resumes that disappeared into digital black holes. The few interviews I managed ended with polite rejections and advice to perhaps consider opportunities in smaller markets. Meanwhile, Marcus's career at Davidson, Pierce and Associates flourished. He'd been brought in during the Peterson merger as a lateral hire, praised for his fresh perspective on corporate integration strategies. The same strategies I'd spent 3 years developing. Rachel's response to my professional exile was a masterclass in willful blindness. I'm sure it's just a rough patch, she'd say over lunch dates that became increasingly infrequent. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling you to try something different. Marcus says the corporate world can be really cutthroat for women. Marcus says. The phrase became a refrain in our conversations, a way of ending discussions before they could begin. Marcus says the legal field is oversaturated. Marcus says networking is more important than credentials. Marcus says some people are just better suited for behind-the-scenes work. The job offers that did come were increasingly humbling. Paralegal positions. Administrative assistant roles. Contract document review for $12 an hour each. Rejection chipped away at my confidence until I began to believe that maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I'd been fooling myself about my capabilities. Maybe the security breach really was my fault, some fundamental flaw in my character that made me unsuitable for positions of trust. The cleaning job was supposed to be temporary. Just something to pay the bills while I figured out my next move. Elite domestic services catered to Manhattan's upper class, providing discreet household management for people who wanted their privacy protected and their homes maintained to museum standards. The pay was decent, the hours flexible, and most importantly, the background check focused on theft and violence, not corporate security breaches. My first assignment was a Park Avenue penthouse owned by a pharmaceutical executive. The work was oddly satisfying in its completeness. Dirty surfaces became clean. Chaos transformed into order. There were no office politics, no hidden agendas, no colleagues spreading whispers about your past mistakes. Just honest work with visible results. The second assignment was a law firm's executive offices, cleaning during evening hours when the lawyers had gone home. I'd vacuum their conference rooms, empty their trash bins, and dust the framed diplomas that looked suspiciously like my own Harvard degree, currently stored in a box under my bed. It was during that assignment that I'd overheard the conversation That changed everything. Director Harrison from Davidson, Pierce and Associates was meeting with a headhunter, discussing the firm's expansion plans and their desperate need for someone with specific expertise in international corporate acquisitions. "We need someone who understands both the technical details and the regulatory landscape," Harrison had said. "Someone who can structure these deals in their sleep." The headhunter had mentioned several candidates, all men, all lacking the particular combination of skills Harrison needed. "What about internal promotions?" she'd asked. "Our current team is solid, but they don't have the international experience. We need someone who's worked on cross-border transactions, someone who understands the European regulatory framework. Frankly, there aren't many people in the market with that specific background." I'd stood frozen in the hallway, cleaning supplies forgotten, listening to them describe the exact skill set I'd been developing for the past 5 years. The Peterson and Associates acquisition had involved extensive European subsidiary integration. I'd spent 6 months in London, working directly with EU regulatory authorities, structuring transactions that saved the merged company $47 million in compliance costs. That conversation happened on a Thursday. By Saturday, I'd researched Harrison's background, identified his key professional relationships, and drafted a strategy for approaching him that bypassed traditional hiring channels entirely. The meeting was arranged through a former Harvard classmate who now worked in international tax law. Just coffee, nothing formal. A chance for Harrison to meet someone who might have insights into the European regulatory landscape he was struggling to navigate. I'd shown up in my best remaining suit, armed with analysis reports I'd prepared on my own time and a detailed proposal for structuring international acquisitions that could save firms millions in regulatory compliance costs. Harrison had been impressed. More than impressed. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need," he'd said, reviewing my European market analysis. "How soon could you start?" The negotiation that followed was swift and decisive. Senior associate position, with a clear partnership track. Signing bonus that exceeded my previous salary. Private office, direct client contact, and most importantly, complete autonomy over the international division's strategic direction. The only catch was timing. Harrison needed someone who could start immediately, but the partnership vote wouldn't happen until the next quarterly meeting. He wanted to bring me in quietly, let my work speak for itself, then present my partnership candidacy as a fait accompli backed by undeniable results. "Can you keep this confidential for now?" he'd asked. "I want to surprise the other partners with what you can accomplish." I'd agreed, signing the employment contract and non-disclosure agreement that afternoon. For 2 weeks, I'd been living a double life. Days spent in Davidson, Pierce and Associates International Division, restructuring deals and building client relationships. Evenings spent in my cleaning uniform, maintaining the fiction that I was still struggling to find my professional footing. The irony was delicious in a way that made my teeth ache. Marcus worked 3 floors below my new office, completely unaware that his wife's failure of a sister was quietly revolutionizing the firm's most profitable division. He'd even complained about the new hotshot in international acquisitions, who was probably making the rest of us look bad with their fancy European connections. Rachel's reaction to my continued cleaning work had shifted from sympathetic to embarrassed to openly irritated. "I don't understand why you're not trying harder," she'd said during our last phone conversation. "Marcus could probably put in a word for you at his firm, but not if you're going to keep doing this Maid thing. It reflects on all of us." The Maid thing. As if honest work was something shameful, something that diminished her by association. As if the woman scrubbing floors couldn't possibly be the same person who'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, who'd been featured in Corporate Law Review, who'd restructured billion-dollar deals before she was 30. But tonight, watching champagne drip from my cleaning uniform while Marcus laughed about the help, I'd realized something important. The humiliation wasn't accidental. The pattern wasn't coincidental. And my exile from corporate law hadn't been the result of bad luck or personal failings. It had been sabotaged, carefully orchestrated and perfectly executed by someone who understood exactly how to destroy a career without leaving fingerprints. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into that conference room as Dr. Jonna Chen, Senior Associate and Partner-elect of Davidson, Pierce and Associates. I would take my seat at the table where decisions were made and power was distributed. And I would watch Marcus's face as Director Harrison introduced the firm's newest equity partner, the woman he'd called just the Maid, exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes ago. But first, I had some documents to review and a presentation to finalize. The champagne might have been washed from my uniform, but the taste of vindication was just beginning to develop its proper flavor, sweet at first, then devastating. The security guard at Davidson, Pierce and Associates nodded as I badged into the building at 6:47 a.m., 3 hours before the partners' meeting that would reshape Marcus's understanding of the universe. My cleaning uniform had been replaced by a charcoal Armani suit, the same one I'd worn to my first client presentation 2 weeks ago when I'd secured the Yamamoto Industries account, a $43 million international acquisition that Marcus had been chasing unsuccessfully for 8 months. "Morning, Dr. Chen," the guard said, glancing at his overnight log. "Director Harrison's already upstairs. Left word that you should head straight to his office when you arrive." The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt different this morning. Not because anything had changed about the polished steel interior or the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, but because in 2 hours and 13 minutes, I would never ride this elevator as a secret again. The woman Marcus had dismissed as just the maid would cease to exist, replaced by the equity partner who controlled the firm's entire international division. Harrison's corner office overlooked Central Park, where early morning joggers traced familiar paths through landscapes that never quite stayed the same. He stood at the window with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly at someone who couldn't see him. "No, Senator Whitfield, I understand your concerns about the regulatory timeline," he was saying. "But our international team has connections at the European Central Bank that could accelerate the approval process by 6 to 8 weeks. Yes, the same team that structured the Yamamoto deal." He turned and spotted me, holding up one finger while he finished the call. "Senator, let me connect you with our lead international counsel this afternoon. Dr. Chen can walk you through the specific regulatory advantages we've identified." "Excellent. I'll have her call your office." Harrison ended the call and smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face into something almost paternal. "Senator Whitfield's infrastructure bill has some interesting international components. 40 billion in European partnerships. If we can navigate the regulatory maze. Think you can handle it? The EU's new infrastructure framework has several expedited pathways for qualifying projects," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "If we structure the partnerships through the Dublin Regulatory Hub and coordinate with the Amsterdam investment protocols, we could compress the timeline from 18 months to 6. "That's what I like to hear." Harrison poured coffee from an elegant silver service, the kind of ritual that marked morning conversations between equals. "Nervous about this morning?" The question surprised me. In 2 weeks of working together, Harrison had never asked about my emotional state, never treated me as anything other than a consummate professional. The inquiry felt strangely intimate, as if he understood that this morning represented more than just a business meeting. "Should I be?" He studied me over his coffee cup, those pale blue eyes that had intimidated opposing counsel for 30 years. Now focused entirely on my face. "Jonna, in my experience, the best partnerships are forged when everyone understands exactly what's at stake. You've proven yourself professionally. Your work on the Yamamoto deal was extraordinary, your regulatory analysis is saving us millions in compliance costs, and your client relationships are already generating referrals." He paused, setting down his cup with deliberate precision. "But this morning isn't really about your professional qualifications, is it?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications I hadn't expected him to understand. Harrison was old-school Wall Street, a man who'd built his career on handshake deals and bourbon-fueled negotiations in private clubs that still maintained dress codes from the 1950s. His world operated on traditional networks, family connections, and the kind of institutional power that rarely concerned itself with personal vendettas or family drama. "I'm not sure I follow," I said carefully. Harrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the polished wood between us. My name was written across the tab in his precise handwriting, but this wasn't my personnel file. This folder was thicker, older, with the worn edges that suggested frequent handling. "Marcus Whitman," Harrison said, opening the folder to reveal a stack of documents I recognized but had never seen assembled in one place. "Your brother-in-law. Currently a mid-level associate in our corporate litigation department. Husband to your sister Rachel. The man responsible for destroying your career at Peterson and Associates." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "I never told you about, you didn't need to." Harrison's voice was calm, almost conversational, as if we were discussing the weather rather than corporate espionage. "Do you know how I knew to contact you about this position, Jonna? How did I know you were available despite your impressive credentials and proven track record?" I set down the coffee cup, my hands suddenly unsteady. "The headhunter mentioned, there was no headhunter." Harrison smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "I've been tracking your career since you graduated from Harvard. Your analysis of the European regulatory framework was required reading in my graduate corporate law seminar 3 years ago. When Peterson and Associates fell apart, I expected to see you land at Sullivan and Cromwell or Skadden, ARPs. Instead, you disappeared. He pulled a document from the folder, sliding it across the desk. It was a printout of an email chain, dated 18 months ago, between Marcus and someone named David Kellerman at Morrison Financial Services. David Kellerman was Peterson's compliance officer, Harrison continued. Also Marcus's roommate at Columbia Law School. Also the man who provided the security access logs that implicated you in the data breach. The email chain was devastating in its casual criminality. Marcus discussed my work schedule, my computer access patterns, my habit of working late in the office when the building's security systems logged different timestamps. Kellerman responded with technical details about how login credentials could be duplicated, how system logs could be manipulated, how a data breach could be traced to a specific user account without that user's knowledge. I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. Evidence of conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, and destruction of professional reputation, Harrison said matter-of-factly. Also grounds for criminal charges against both Marcus and Kellerman, if you were inclined to pursue that route. I stared at the emails, reading Marcus's words with growing horror. The planning had been meticulous, the execution flawless. They'd destroyed my career with the same attention to detail that I'd applied to structuring billion-dollar deals, turning my own professional habits into weapons against me. How did you get these? Harrison's smile widened. Marcus is many things, but technologically sophisticated isn't one of them. He conducted this entire conspiracy through his work email account, apparently unaware that Davidson, Pierce and Associates maintains comprehensive digital archives of all employee communications. When he joined the firm last year, his email history transferred automatically to our servers. The implications hit me like physical blows. Marcus had been working at Davidson, Pierce and Associates for over a year, sitting in meetings, attending firm events, networking with partners, all while carrying evidence of his crimes in company files that Harrison could access at will. You've known about this for a year. 18 months, Harrison corrected. I've been building a case file since the day Marcus submitted his employment application. Did you know he listed you as a professional reference? Claimed you'd worked together on several high-profile acquisition deals and would vouch for his innovative approach to problem-solving. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus had destroyed my career and then used my former position to bolster his own credentials, lying about our professional relationship to gain employment at the firm where I should have been working all along. The Peterson acquisition that made his reputation here? Harrison continued, pulling out another document. That was your work. The regulatory framework, the European subsidiary integration, the compliance protocols that saved $47 million in restructuring costs. All your analysis, presented under his name. The document was a proposal I'd written 2 years ago, complete with my research notes and strategic recommendations. Marcus's name had been substituted for mine throughout, but the analytical style was unmistakably my own. Anyone familiar with my work would recognize the methodology, the attention to regulatory detail, the innovative approach to cross-border transaction structuring. He's been taking credit for my work, I said, the words feeling inadequate to describe the scope of the betrayal. Systematically and comprehensively, Harrison agreed. The Yamamoto deal you closed 2 weeks ago? Marcus had been trying to land that client for 8 months, using a strategic approach that was fundamentally flawed. He'd been pitching traditional domestic acquisition models to a company that specifically needed international regulatory expertise. Harrison pulled out a thick stack of papers, Marcus's failed Yamamoto proposals bound with red ribbon. 17 different presentations, each one missing the crucial European regulatory components that ultimately sealed the deal. When you structured the transaction through the Dublin hub and coordinated with Amsterdam investment protocols, you accomplished in 2 weeks what Marcus couldn't do in 8 months. The picture was becoming clear, painted in documents and email chains and corporate files that told the story of my professional assassination and Marcus's subsequent rise. He'd stolen my work, destroyed my reputation, then built his career on the foundation of my ideas while I cleaned floors and emptied trash bins. Why? I asked. Why help me? Why go through all this trouble to expose Marcus? Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in a gesture that reminded me of law school professors contemplating particularly complex ethical problems. 3 reasons. First, Marcus Whitman is a mediocre lawyer who's been coasting on stolen intellectual property. His actual work product is derivative at best, and his client relationships are shallow. This firm can't afford to promote incompetence, regardless of how well it's disguised. He held up a second finger. Second, you're exceptional at what you do. Your regulatory analysis is innovative, your client relationships are built on genuine expertise, and your strategic thinking is exactly what we need to expand our international practice. I don't care about office politics or family drama, but I do care about talent. The third finger joined the other two. And third, I despise bullies. I've spent 30 years in corporate law watching mediocre men advance by undermining talented women. Marcus represents everything wrong with this profession, and you represent everything right with it. He closed the folder and slid it toward me. This is yours now. Everything we've discussed, all the evidence of Marcus's fraud and theft. Complete documentation of his crimes against you and his lies to this firm. What you do with it is entirely your decision. I picked up the folder, feeling its weight like a physical thing. Inside was the power to destroy Marcus's career, to expose his fraud, to reclaim credit for work he'd stolen and recognition he'd never earned. Justice served cold and comprehensively. There's one more thing, Harrison said, reaching into his desk drawer again. This time he pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind used for dictating legal memos and recording client interviews. Marcus has been in my office 3 times in the past 2 weeks, asking about the mysterious new hire in international acquisitions. He's convinced someone is trying to undermine his position at the firm. Harrison pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the office, clear and unmistakably arrogant. I'm concerned about this new person internationally. Nobody seems to know where they came from or what their qualifications are. In my experience, when firms make secretive hires like this, it usually means someone's playing politics. Harrison's recorded voice responded with professional neutrality. The international division has been performing exceptionally well lately. Client satisfaction is up, deal closure rates have improved, and our regulatory compliance costs have dropped significantly. That's exactly my point, Marcus continued. It's suspicious. Real success in this business takes time to build. When someone shows up and immediately starts outperforming established team members, it raises questions about their methods. I'd hate to see this firm get burned by another Peterson situation. Another Peterson situation. The casual reference to my professional destruction, spoken as if it were a cautionary tale rather than a crime he'd orchestrated. The arrogance was staggering, the sociopathy complete. Harrison stopped the recording. He made that statement 4 days ago. Yesterday, he submitted a formal request for a background check on our new international hire, citing concerns about corporate security and client confidentiality. The request form lay on Harrison's desk like a smoking gun, Marcus's signature bold and confident at the bottom. He was so convinced of his own cleverness, so certain that his sabotage had been perfect, that he was now trying to destroy my second career using the same techniques that had worked so well the first time. The partners' meeting starts in 90 minutes, Harrison said, glancing at his watch. Marcus will be there, expecting to hear about routine quarterly business and maybe some discussion about mid-level associate promotions. Instead, he's going to watch me announce the youngest equity partner in the firm's history. Harrison stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the morning sky. The choice is yours, Jonna. We can handle this quietly, professionally. Announce your partnership, let Marcus figure out his own response, maintain corporate dignity throughout. Or, he turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. Or we can ensure that Marcus Whitman never has the opportunity to destroy another woman's career. Ever. The folder felt warm in my hands, heavy with possibility and potential consequences. In 90 minutes, I would walk into that conference room as Dr. Jonna Chen, equity partner. The question was whether Marcus would walk out as the same man who'd entered. Justice, I was learning, came in many flavors. But revenge was an art form that required perfect timing and flawless execution. The clock on Harrison's wall ticked toward 9 a.m. with mechanical precision, counting down the moments until Marcus's world would shatter like champagne glasses against marble floors, sweet at first. Then devastating. Then permanent. Harrison's office door clicked shut behind me at exactly 8:15 a.m., leaving me alone in the hallway with a manila folder that contained enough evidence to destroy a man's life. The weight of it felt disproportionate to its actual mass, as if the papers inside had absorbed the gravity of 3 years' worth of lies, theft, and calculated cruelty. I walked toward the International Division's wing, my heels clicking against polished marble in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The familiar route to my office, my real office, not the supply closet where I'd stored mops and vacuum cleaners for 2 weeks, felt different this morning. Every door I passed represented a choice point, a decision about how far I was willing to go to reclaim what had been stolen from me. The International Division occupied the building's northwest corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering unobstructed views of the Hudson River and the morning commuter traffic that flowed like blood through Manhattan's arteries. My nameplate had been installed yesterday. Dr. Jonna Chen, Senior Associate, International Acquisitions. By noon today, it would read Dr. Jonna Chen, Equity Partner. Assuming I survived the next 3 hours and 47 minutes. I settled behind my desk, mahogany, leather inlay, the kind of furniture that communicated serious authority, and opened Harrison's folder. The documents were organized with military precision, each section labeled and cross-referenced. Email evidence. Financial records. Client files. Witness statements. And at the very back, a section labeled simply, Rachel. My sister's name written in Harrison's careful handwriting made my stomach clench. I'd assumed Rachel was merely an enabler, someone who'd chosen willful blindness over confronting her husband's cruelty. The documents in this section told a different story entirely. The first page was a bank statement from Rachel's personal checking account, dating back 2 years. Monthly deposits of $15,000, always on the 15th, always from an account listed as MW Holdings LLC. Below that, incorporation papers for MW Holdings, filed in Delaware with Marcus listed as sole owner and Rachel as primary beneficiary. Marcus had been paying my sister a monthly salary for 2 years. Not spousal support, not shared household expenses, but structured payments from a business entity that existed solely to funnel money from Marcus's legal work to Rachel's personal accounts. The next document was a consulting agreement between MW Holdings and Peterson and Associates, dated 6 months before my career imploded. The contract outlined Rachel's role as a client relations specialist, responsible for identifying potential security vulnerabilities in confidential client communications. Her monthly compensation, exactly $15,000. My sister hadn't just enabled Marcus's sabotage of my career. She'd been paid to participate in it. The evidence chain was meticulous and damning. Rachel's cell phone records showing regular contact with Kellerman at Peterson during the exact period when my security credentials were being compromised. Credit card receipts for lunches and dinners where Rachel had entertained Peterson employees who had access to the compliance systems. Hotel charges for weekend trips to the Hamptons where Rachel had hosted informal gatherings for Peterson staff members who later provided testimony about my allegedly suspicious behavior. She'd been running a systematic intelligence operation against her own sister, funded by her husband's law firm and designed to create the perfect conditions for my professional destruction. But the most devastating document was handwritten, in Rachel's familiar cursive script. A memo to Marcus, dated 1 week before the security breach investigation began. M. spoke with Jenny from compliance today over drinks. She mentioned Jay has been working late again, usually stays until 9 or 10 p.m. when building security switches to night protocols. Jenny says the system automatically logs anyone who accesses files after hours as irregular usage for tracking purposes. She seemed concerned about Jay's workload but said the late-night access creates a paper trail that looks suspicious if anyone reviews it later. Thought you should know. Arf, my sister had identified the security loophole that would be used to frame me. She'd cultivated relationships with Peterson employees specifically to gather intelligence about internal procedures. She'd provided Marcus with the technical information he needed to orchestrate a perfect sabotage, then collected her monthly payments while watching my career disintegrate. I closed the folder and walked to the window, staring out at the river. Traffic that moved in predictable patterns, following routes that had been established decades ago and rarely questioned. Below, I could see Marcus's silver BMW pulling into the parking garage, right on schedule for the 9 a.m. partners meeting that would reshape his understanding of power dynamics in this family. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. Hey, sorry about last night. Marcus feels bad about the champagne thing. Maybe we can all have lunch this weekend? I think he's ready to help you find something more professional than the cleaning work. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Rachel knew exactly what Marcus had done to me, she'd helped orchestrate it, but she could still send messages positioning herself as the concerned sister trying to help her struggling sibling find something more professional. The performance was flawless, so thoroughly rehearsed that I wondered if she'd convinced herself it was genuine. I scrolled through our text history, viewing 18 months of conversations with new eyes. Every message of sympathy, every offer of emotional support, every expression of sisterly concern had been simultaneous with her receipt of $15,000 in blood money. She'd been mourning my professional death while collecting payment for causing it. Another buzz, this time an email from Marcus's work account. All associates and partners, mandatory attendance at this morning's quarterly meeting. Director Harrison will be announcing significant changes to firm structure and personnel. Conference room A, 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus had sent that message to the entire firm, including me, without realizing that significant changes to firm structure and personnel would primarily involve his own professional execution. The irony was almost artistic in its perfection, but irony wouldn't be enough. Justice required strategy, and strategy required understanding exactly what weapons I had available and how best to deploy them for maximum impact. I opened my laptop and began constructing a presentation that would run parallel to whatever Harrison had planned for this morning's meeting. If I was going to reclaim my power, I needed to do it comprehensively, publicly, and with such overwhelming evidence that neither Marcus nor Rachel could ever again control the narrative about who I was or what I was capable of achieving. The first slide was simple: professional fraud and corporate espionage, a case study in systematic career destruction. Below that, a photo of me at Harvard Law School graduation, accepting an award for academic excellence in corporate law. The second slide, timeline of sabotage, 2021 to 2024. A detailed chronology showing Marcus's payments to Rachel, her intelligence gathering activities at Peterson, the gradual erosion of my professional relationships, and the perfectly timed security breach that had destroyed my career. The third slide, financial evidence. Bank statements, consulting agreements, and payment records showing exactly how much money had changed hands to purchase my sister's participation in her husband's scheme. The fourth slide, professional impact. A comparison of my work at Peterson versus Marcus's subsequent presentations at Davidson, Pierce and Associates, with highlighted sections showing where my analysis had been copied verbatim and presented under his name. But the final slide was the masterpiece: current status and future implications. A photograph of me in my cleaning uniform, taken from security cameras at Marcus and Rachel's penthouse building, with a timestamp from exactly 12 hours ago. Next to it, another photograph of me in my Armani suit, taken in this office 20 minutes ago, with my equity partnership announcement letter clearly visible on the desk. The juxtaposition would be devastating. The woman they'd dismissed as just the maid, revealing herself as the firm's youngest equity partner, holding evidence of their crimes and the power to destroy their carefully constructed lives. My desk phone rang at 8:43 a.m. Harrison's extension. The partners are gathering early, he said without preamble. Marcus is already here, looking very pleased with himself. I think he believes this meeting is about promoting him to senior associate. Through my office window, I could see the conference room on the floor below, its glass walls offering a perfect view of the mahogany table where firm decisions were made. Marcus sat in his usual chair, laughing with two other associates, gesturing animatedly while they nodded with the kind of desperate attention that junior lawyers paid to anyone they thought might influence their advancement prospects. Has he asked about the new international hire? I asked. Twice. He's convinced we're about to fire you for security concerns, just like Peterson did. He actually offered to personally handle the delicate conversation about your termination. The audacity was staggering, but not surprising. Marcus had spent 3 years believing his own propaganda about my professional inadequacies. In his mind, the maid who'd cleaned his floors last night couldn't possibly be the same person threatening his position at the law firm. His worldview simply couldn't accommodate that level of cognitive dissonance. I'm ready, I said. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no walking it back. Marcus will be finished, professionally and possibly criminally. Rachel's involvement will become public knowledge. Your family dynamics will never recover. I thought about Rachel's text message, still glowing on my phone screen. The casual offer of lunch, the patronizing suggestion that Marcus might help me find professional work, the complete absence of any acknowledgement that she'd helped orchestrate the destruction of my career for monthly payments of $15,000. My family dynamics died 18 months ago, I said. I just didn't know it until last night. Harrison's chuckle was dry as autumn leaves. In that case, Dr. Chen, let's go make history. And Jonna? Bring the presentation you've been working on this morning. I suspect we'll need it. I closed the laptop and gathered my materials, the evidence folder, my presentation files, and a printed copy of the Yamamoto Industries acquisition contract that bore my signature as lead counsel. The same contract that had been featured in Corporate Law Weekly as an example of innovative international deal structuring, though the article had somehow failed to mention that the lawyer responsible was currently working as a part-time house cleaner. The elevator ride to the conference floor felt like descending into an arena where gladiators fought for survival and only one combatant walked away with their dignity intact. The difference was that in ancient Rome, the gladiators at least knew they were in a fight. Marcus still believed he was attending a routine business meeting. The conference room doors stood open, revealing 12 senior partners arranged around a table that had witnessed decades of corporate warfare disguised as civilized discussion. At the far end, Harrison's chair waited empty, positioned to command attention from every person in the room. Marcus sat halfway down the table, his expression confident and expectant. He dressed carefully for this meeting: navy suit, red tie, gold cufflinks that caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The costume of a man who expected to be promoted, celebrated, and congratulated on his professional accomplishments. He had no idea he was about to discover what those accomplishments actually cost. I positioned myself outside the conference room. Doors, laptop in hand, waiting for Harrison's signal. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus checking his phone, probably reading the same text message from Rachel that I'd received 20 minutes ago. Another note of sisterly concern about my cleaning work and professional prospects, written by a woman who'd been paid $360,000 over 2 years to destroy both. Harrison entered the conference room at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of a man who'd been anticipating this moment for 18 months. The partners fell silent as he took his seat, their attention focused entirely on whatever announcement would justify calling a special meeting on such short notice. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect space. "This morning, we're going to discuss corporate fraud, professional integrity, and the price of systematic career destruction. We're also going to announce the newest equity partner in this firm's history." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his smile widening with anticipation. "But first," Harrison continued, his gaze settling directly on Marcus's face, "we need to address some irregularities in our employment practices and client relations that have come to my attention." Harrison gestured toward the conference room doors, where I stood with my presentation loaded and ready. "I'd like you all to meet Dr. Jonna Chen, who will be explaining exactly how professional sabotage works in the modern legal environment." The doors opened, and I stepped into the room where my career would either be reborn or definitively ended. Marcus's smile froze on his face like ice forming on glass, beautiful and brittle and about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Sister's husband called me just the maid. Part 5, the confrontation and systematic dismantling. The mahogany table reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across legal portfolios and coffee cups that sat undisturbed as 12 senior partners focused their attention on the woman who'd just entered their sanctuary carrying evidence that would rewrite the firm's history. Marcus sat frozen in his chair like a sculpture carved from disbelief, his mouth slightly open, his perfectly knotted tie suddenly seeming too tight around his throat. The confident smile he'd worn while greeting his colleagues 30 minutes ago had vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed stare of a man watching his carefully constructed reality crumble in real time. "Dr. Chen," Harrison announced to the room, "has been conducting an investigation into corporate espionage and professional fraud that directly impacts this firm's operations and client relationships." I connected my laptop to the presentation system, my hands steady despite the significance of what I was about to unleash. The screen behind me illuminated with a title that would serve as Marcus's professional obituary: "The Anatomy of Career Assassination, a 3-year criminal conspiracy." 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this moment. I was terminated from Peterson and Associates following allegations of security breaches and corporate espionage. The evidence against me was circumstantial but compelling. My login credentials had been used to access confidential files during suspicious time periods, and several clients had reported concerns about information leaks. Marcus's breathing had become shallow, barely visible except for the slight rise and fall of his expensive suit jacket. His hands gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become fluid and dangerous. "What I discovered 2 weeks ago," I continued, advancing to the next slide, "is that my termination wasn't the result of professional negligence or criminal behavior. It was the culmination of a sophisticated sabotage operation orchestrated by someone in this room." The slide displayed a network diagram showing connections between Marcus, Rachel, and David Kellerman at Peterson and Associates. Arrows indicated the flow of information, money, and coordinated actions that had resulted in my professional destruction. Partner Morrison, whose white-collar criminal defense practice had made him wealthy by defending exactly these kinds of cases, leaned forward with the focused attention of a predator recognizing prey. "Dr. Chen, are you alleging that a current employee of this firm participated in a criminal conspiracy?" "I'm not alleging anything," I replied, clicking to the next slide. "I'm presenting documented evidence of systematic fraud that has cost this firm millions in lost opportunities and exposed us to significant legal liability." The financial records appeared on screen: bank statements, wire transfers, and consulting agreements that painted a picture of purchased corruption so comprehensive it resembled a textbook case study in corporate crime. Rachel's monthly payments from MW Holdings LLC, Marcus's shell company, were documented with timestamps and account numbers that left no room for interpretation. Associate Whitman established a business entity for the sole purpose of paying my Sister to gather intelligence about my work habits, security access patterns, and professional relationships. Over 24 months, he transferred $430,000 to fund this operation. The gasps from around the table were audible, sharp intakes of breath from lawyers who'd spent careers prosecuting and defending exactly these kinds of systematic frauds. The dollar amount elevated the crime from misdemeanor territory into felony ranges that carried prison sentences measured in years rather than months. Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged as a hoarse whisper rather than the confident baritone he'd used to order me around his penthouse. This is fabricated. Jana's been unstable since Peterson, everyone knows that. She's creating these documents to justify some kind of revenge fantasy. Harrison smiled with the cold satisfaction of a chess master who'd been planning this checkmate for months. Marcus, every document Dr. Chen has presented comes from your own email account and financial records. Davidson, Pierce & Associates maintains comprehensive archives of all employee communications, including the detailed correspondence between you and David Kellerman regarding the systematic destruction of Dr. Chen's career. The next slide displayed Marcus's emails in his own words, casual discussions of my destruction presented with the kind of specific detail that made denial impossible. Planning sessions with Kellerman, progress reports on the intelligence gathering operation, and celebrations of successful sabotage documented in corporate email systems that preserved every word with digital permanence. The conspiracy, I continued, my confidence growing with each revelation, involved three coordinated elements. First, intelligence gathering through my sister's cultivation of Peterson compliance officers. Second, systematic manipulation of security access logs to create the appearance of suspicious activity. Third, strategic timing of the investigation to coincide with my involvement in the firm's most sensitive acquisition deals. The evidence was overwhelming, but the real devastation came with the intellectual property theft slides. Side by side. Comparisons of my original analysis and Marcus's subsequent presentations to Davidson, Pierce & Associates clients, showing plagiarism so blatant it bordered on criminal stupidity. This is my original regulatory framework analysis for European acquisitions, I said, pointing to the left side of the screen. And this is Associate Whitman's presentation to 3 different clients over the past 18 months, presented as his own innovative strategic thinking. Partner Williams, whose intellectual property practice had built his reputation on prosecuting exactly these kinds of theft cases, was photographing the slides with his phone while taking detailed notes. The copyright violations alone would support millions in damages, he muttered to partner Clark. Combined with the fraud charges, we're looking at federal criminal territory. Marcus's face had progressed through several stages of pallor, finally settling on a grayish hue that suggested imminent cardiovascular distress. His gold cufflinks caught the light as his hands trembled against the table, creating small percussion rhythms that provided a soundtrack to his professional execution. But the most sophisticated aspect of this operation, I said, advancing to the evidence that would end any possibility of Marcus's survival, was the psychological manipulation designed to make me complicit in my own destruction. The slide showed a timeline of family interactions, documenting how Marcus had used Rachel to isolate me from professional networks, undermine my confidence, and create the conditions where his sabotage would seem like the inevitable result of my own inadequacies rather than criminal interference. Associate Whitman didn't just destroy my career through technical manipulation of security systems. He orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to convince me that I deserved what was happening, that my professional failures were the result of personal inadequacies rather than deliberate sabotage. The psychological warfare had been as systematic as the technical fraud, Rachel's gradual distancing, family gatherings where my achievements were minimized, subtle suggestions that maybe corporate law wasn't the right fit for my personality. A carefully constructed narrative that positioned Marcus as the successful one and me as the struggling sibling who couldn't quite make it in the real world. The ultimate goal, I continued, wasn't just career destruction. It was identity erasure. Associate Whitman wanted me to believe that I was never qualified for corporate law in the first place, that my previous successes were flukes, and that cleaning floors was actually a more appropriate use of my capabilities. The room had become completely silent except for the soft scratching of pens on paper as partners documented evidence for what was clearly going to become a criminal referral to federal prosecutors. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. This was no longer an internal personnel matter but a law enforcement issue that required institutional protection and strategic legal response. Partner Morrison cleared his throat, the sound carrying 30 years of authority in white-collar criminal defense. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what would be the appropriate remedy for this level of systematic fraud? The question was a formality, a legal courtesy that allowed me to recommend the consequences for my own professional assassination. The answer had been predetermined by the scope of Marcus's crimes, but delivering it myself would complete the circle of justice in a way that felt almost poetic. Full criminal prosecution for conspiracy to commit fraud, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage, I said without hesitation. Restitution for financial damages including lost earnings, legal fees, and punitive damages. Permanent disbarment from the practice of law. And comprehensive investigation of any co-conspirators who participated in the scheme. Marcus made one final attempt at salvaging his situation, his voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. You can't prove intent. This is all circumstantial. My relationship with Rachel is personal, not criminal. Harrison stood and walked to his briefcase, removing a thick folder that he placed on the table with the satisfied finality of a judge delivering a verdict. Marcus, your intent is documented in 47 separate email communications with David Kellerman. Your criminal conspiracy is confirmed by financial records showing systematic payments for illegal services. Your theft of Dr. Chen's intellectual property is proven by forensic analysis of document creation timestamps and plagiarism detection software. He opened the folder to reveal federal criminal referral forms, already completed and awaiting only final signatures before submission to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The FBI's white-collar crime unit has expressed significant interest in corporate espionage cases involving multiple law firms and systematic professional sabotage. Your case meets all their criteria for federal prosecution. The mention of federal charges seemed to physically impact Marcus, his body sagging in his chair as if the weight of potential prison sentences had become a tangible force pressing down on his shoulders. Federal prosecution meant not just career destruction but genuine incarceration, the kind of consequences that couldn't be negotiated away through legal maneuvering or family connections. The firm, Harrison continued, has 3 options for handling this matter. We can terminate your employment immediately and cooperate fully with federal investigators. We can negotiate your resignation with full restitution and supervised disbarment proceedings. Or we can maintain your employment pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, which would expose the firm to significant liability and reputational damage. The choice was no choice at all, a legal formality that provided the appearance of options while offering only one viable path forward. Marcus's employment at Davidson, Pierce and Associates was effectively over. The only question was whether his departure would be quiet and dignified or public and humiliating. Partner Clark was already drafting what appeared to be crisis management communications, preparing statements for clients who would need to be notified that their cases were being reassigned due to personnel changes. The machinery of institutional self-preservation had begun operating, and Marcus was about to discover that corporate law firms protected themselves with the same ruthless efficiency they brought to defending their clients. I need to call Rachel, Marcus whispered, reaching for his phone with hands that shook like autumn leaves in the winter wind. I wouldn't recommend that, I said, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd anticipated this moment and prepared for every possible response. Rachel will be receiving a visit from federal agents this afternoon. Conspiracy to commit corporate espionage is a federal crime, and her participation in your scheme makes her equally liable for criminal prosecution. The color drained from Marcus's face so completely that he resembled a photograph of himself rather than a living person. The realization that his carefully constructed criminal enterprise would destroy not just his own career but his wife's freedom seemed to hit him with physical force. This is over, Harrison announced to the room, standing and gathering the criminal referral documents. Marcus, you have until noon to clear your office and surrender your firm access credentials. Security will escort you from the building. And any attempts to contact clients or access firm resources will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice. The partners began filing out of the conference room, their conversations already focused on damage control, client notifications, and the legal procedures that would protect the firm from association with Marcus's crimes. The mood was businesslike. Rather than emotional, the cold professionalism of institutional survival overriding any personal feelings about watching a colleague's career end in criminal disgrace, Marcus remained seated at the mahogany table, staring at the presentation screen that still displayed evidence of his own criminal conspiracy. His expensive suit, his polished shoes, his carefully cultivated image of professional success, all of it rendered meaningless by the systematic documentation of his crimes. Jonna, he said finally, his voice barely audible above the air conditioning system's mechanical hum. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air like smoke, too little and far too late to matter. 3 years of professional exile, months of cleaning floors while he built his career on stolen intellectual property, and 12 hours of humiliation while he called me just the maid couldn't be erased by 2 words delivered after his crimes had been exposed. No, I said, gathering my presentation materials and preparing to leave him alone with the consequences of his choices. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. I walked toward the conference room exit, leaving Marcus to contemplate the wreckage of his carefully planned life. Tomorrow, he would wake up unemployed, under federal investigation, and facing the possibility of years in prison. His wife would be preparing for her own criminal defense. His reputation would be destroyed beyond repair, but today, I had a partnership announcement to celebrate and an international acquisitions division to run. The woman Marcus had dismissed as just the maid had work to do, the kind of work that mattered, in a career that could never again be taken away by small men with large ambitions and criminal minds. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served in conference rooms with high-definition presentation systems and comprehensive documentation. The taste was everything I'd hoped it would be. The FBI field office on Federal Plaza buzzed with the controlled energy of an institution that processed white-collar crimes like a factory processing widgets, systematically, efficiently, and without emotional attachment to the human wreckage left in its wake. Special Agent Patricia Hendricks sat across from me in interview room C, her gray suit and sensible shoes marking her as someone who'd built her career on unraveling financial conspiracies that destroyed lives with spreadsheet precision. Dr. Chen, she said, reviewing the thick file that Harrison had delivered personally that morning, in 23 years of investigating corporate fraud, I've rarely seen documentation this comprehensive. Your brother-in-law appears to have committed every federal crime short of actual murder. 3 days had passed since Marcus's termination, 3 days during which the machinery of federal justice had begun grinding toward inevitable prosecution. The case had been fast-tracked through the U.S. Attorney's Office, assigned to a prosecutor who specialized in multi-jurisdictional fraud cases and had a conviction rate that made defense attorneys recommend plea bargains before indictments were even filed. The financial records alone, Agent Hendricks continued, support charges of conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The intellectual property theft adds copyright violations and trade secret misappropriation. The systematic sabotage of your career constitutes interference with interstate commerce. She pulled out a legal pad covered with handwritten notes, the kind of meticulous documentation that preceded search warrants and grand jury indictments. What we need from you today is a complete timeline of the conspiracy, starting with the first suspicious incident and continuing through yesterday's confrontation at your law firm. The interview lasted 4 hours, during which I reconstructed 3 years of systematic professional destruction with the kind of detail that would make conviction inevitable. Agent Hendricks recorded every word, photographed every document, and asked the kinds of specific questions that defense attorneys would struggle to counter during cross-examination. One final question, she said as we concluded the session. Your sister Rachel has been scheduled for an interview tomorrow morning. She's retained Anthony Scaramucci as counsel, which suggests she understands the seriousness of the charges. Do you have any message you'd like me to convey? The question surprised me. In all the planning for Marcus's destruction, I'd somehow avoided thinking about Rachel's impending confrontation with federal law enforcement. My sister, who'd collected $430,000 for orchestrating my professional assassination, would be sitting in this same sterile room tomorrow, facing the same methodical questioning that had just documented her participation in a criminal conspiracy. Tell her, I said after a long pause, that family loyalty should flow both ways. Agent Hendricks smiled, the expression carrying 30 years of experience with family betrayals that ended in federal courtrooms. Dr. Chen, we'll be in touch about grand jury testimony. In the meantime, I'd recommend avoiding any direct contact with the subjects of this investigation. I left the FBI building and walked the 6 blocks to Davidson, Pierce and Associates, where my new life as an equity partner had begun to establish its own rhythms and expectations. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of client meetings, staff introductions, and strategic planning sessions for the international division's expansion into Asian markets, but it was the small moments that marked the most significant changes. The way junior associates now addressed me as Dr. Chen, with genuine respect rather than the performative deference they'd shown when they thought I was just another cleaning lady. The way my name appeared on firm letterhead, positioned between lawyers whose careers I'd studied and admired for years. The way my office phone rang with calls from corporate executives who wanted advice on billion-dollar transactions. My secretary, an efficient woman named Margaret who'd managed 3 equity partners' schedules over the past decade, greeted me with a stack of messages that would have overwhelmed me a week ago but now felt like the natural consequence of professional success. Dr. Chen, the Times called about the feature article on your partnership announcement. They want to schedule the photo shoot for Thursday. Also, Senator Whitfield's office confirmed your appointment for next week regarding the infrastructure bill's international components. The irony wasn't lost on me. A week ago, Marcus had been dismissing me as someone who should stick to what I know best, while cleaning his champagne glasses. Today, United States senators were seeking my expertise on legislation that would reshape international commerce for decades to come, but the most significant call was from a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in 3 days, Rachel's cell phone. The voicemail message was waiting in my inbox, her voice strained with an exhaustion I'd never heard before. "Jonna, it's me. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need you to understand something before tomorrow. Please call me back." I deleted the message without responding. Whatever Rachel needed me to understand could be explained to federal investigators during her interview tomorrow morning. The time for private family conversations had ended when she accepted the first $15,000 payment for destroying her sister's career. The remainder of my afternoon was consumed by a client meeting that would have been impossible a week ago. Yamamoto Industries wanted to expand their European operations through a complex acquisition structure that involved regulatory approval in 7 different countries. The deal was worth $3.2 billion and would require coordination with government agencies, international banks, and legal systems that operated under fundamentally different frameworks. Dr. Chen, Yamamoto's CEO, said through his translator, "Your regulatory analysis has already saved us 6 months of approval processes. We're prepared to retain your firm exclusively for all our international expansion work." The exclusivity agreement he presented was worth $47 million over 3 years, more money than Marcus would earn in his entire career even if he hadn't destroyed it through criminal stupidity. The contract bore my signature as lead counsel, my name positioned where Marcus had dreamed of seeing his own for the 8 months he'd unsuccessfully chased this client. As evening approached, I found myself in the conference room where Marcus's career had ended 3 days ago. The mahogany table reflected the city lights beginning to twinkle beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to shift with each passing moment. Harrison entered the room, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Dom Perignon 1996, he said, popping the cork with practiced ease. "I've been saving this for a special occasion." The irony of celebrating with champagne, the same beverage Marcus had thrown in my face while dismissing me as just the maid, was too perfect to be accidental. Harrison had planned this moment with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his entire approach to destroying Marcus's career. "To justice," he said, raising his glass. "To consequences," I replied, touching my glass too. The champagne was perfect, complex, sophisticated, and completely different from the harsh taste of Marcus's Dom Perignon that had burned my eyes 3 days ago. This was the taste of victory, aged to perfection and served at the precise moment when it would mean the most. "There's something you should know," Harrison said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Marcus tried to contact 3 different reporters this morning, attempting to sell them a story about corporate retaliation and family feuds. None of them were interested once they reviewed the FBI evidence file. The desperation was predictable but somehow still disappointing. Even facing federal prosecution for systematic fraud, Marcus was trying to manipulate public opinion through media narratives that positioned him as the victim of corporate politics rather than the perpetrator of criminal conspiracy. He also tried to withdraw his resignation," Harrison continued, claiming he'd been coerced into signing termination documents while under emotional distress. "Our legal department informed him that employment termination due to criminal activity doesn't require employee consent." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Jonna, this is Rachel. I'm at the Four Seasons downtown, room 1247. I need to see you before tomorrow. Please." I showed the message to Harrison, who studied it with the expression of a chess master contemplating his opponent's final desperate gambit. "She's trying to control the narrative one last time," he said. "Probably wants to negotiate some kind of family reconciliation that would complicate her federal testimony." The suggestion was undoubtedly accurate. Rachel had spent 2 years perfecting the art of manipulation through family relationships, using sisterly bonds to extract information that would be used against me. Her final play would inevitably involve appeals to family loyalty and shared history, attempting to leverage emotional connections that she'd systematically destroyed through her participation in Marcus's scheme. "Are you going to meet her?" Harrison asked. The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that extended beyond simple family drama. Meeting Rachel would provide closure, but it would also give her an opportunity to plant seeds of doubt about my motivations and testimony. Not meeting her would leave questions unanswered, but it would also preserve the clarity of moral positioning that had made my victory possible. "No," I said after a long pause. Whatever Rachel needs to tell me, she can tell the FBI tomorrow morning. Harrison nodded with approval, recognizing the strategic wisdom of maintaining distance from subjects of ongoing federal investigation. Dr. Chen, in my experience, the hardest part of achieving justice isn't identifying the crime or building the case. It's maintaining the emotional discipline to see it through to completion without being derailed by personal relationships. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from the same unknown number. I declined the call and blocked the number, watching it disappear from my contacts with the same finality that had characterized my entire approach to reclaiming my stolen career. The city lights outside the conference room windows had fully illuminated, creating a pattern of geometric beauty that stretched from the Hudson River to the East River. Somewhere in that grid of lights, Marcus was probably sitting in his penthouse, contemplating the wreckage of his carefully constructed life. Somewhere else, Rachel was probably staring at her phone, wondering why her sister wouldn't answer her calls, but in this conference room, at this mahogany table, justice had been served with the kind of precision that made revenge an art form, rather than an emotional outburst. The woman Marcus had dismissed as just the maid had not only reclaimed her career but had become the architect of his destruction. "There's one more thing," Harrison said, pulling out a final document from his briefcase. "The partnership agreement includes a clause about profit sharing from accounts you've personally secured. The Yamamoto Industries exclusivity deal alone will generate approximately $2 million in personal compensation over the next 3 years. $2 million. More money than I'd lost during my 3 years of professional exile. More money than Marcus had stolen through his intellectual property theft. More money than Rachel had collected for her participation in the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my career, but the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was sitting in this conference room as an equity partner, discussing billion-dollar transactions with clients who respected my expertise, building a career that could never again be sabotaged by small men with criminal minds, and family members who confused loyalty with corruption. To new beginnings," Harrison said, refilling our champagne glasses. "To permanent endings," I replied, thinking of Marcus's terminated career and Rachel's impending federal prosecution. The champagne tasted even better the second time, complex and sophisticated and completely unlike the harsh beverage that had burned my eyes when Marcus had dismissed me as someone who should stick to what she knew best. This was the taste of triumph, perfectly aged and served at the exact moment when its significance would be most profound. Tomorrow, Rachel would sit in interview room C at the FBI field office, facing the same methodical questioning that would document her participation in systematic professional assassination. Tomorrow, Marcus would receive formal notification of his federal indictment for conspiracy, fraud, and intellectual property theft. Tomorrow, the machinery of justice would continue grinding toward inevitable convictions that would send both of them to federal prison for years, but tonight, I had champagne to finish and partnership agreements to review and international acquisitions to structure for clients who valued genuine expertise over stolen intellectual property. The woman Marcus had called just the maid exactly 72 hours ago was gone, replaced by an equity partner who would never again allow anyone to define her worth or determine her professional future. Justice, I'd learned, was indeed a dish best served cold. But victory was best savored warm, in conference rooms with mahogany tables and Dom Perignon champagne, surrounded by the evidence of crimes that had been exposed and careers that had been reclaimed. The taste would linger for years to come. 6 months later, I stood in the marble lobby of the Chen Institute for Corporate Justice, watching sunlight stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. The building had once housed a small investment firm that had collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. Now it served as headquarters for the nonprofit foundation I'd established with my partnership earnings from the Yamamoto Industries deal and 12 other international acquisitions that had followed in its wake. The nameplate beside the elevator read Dr. Jonna Chen, Executive Director, in elegant gold lettering, but today it would be joined by 15 other names representing the first class of fellows in our professional sabotage recovery program. Young lawyers, accountants, consultants, and business analysts who'd had their careers systematically destroyed by colleagues, supervisors, or family members, then struggled for years to rebuild their professional identities while battling the invisible scars of institutional betrayal. "Dr. Chen," Margaret said, appearing beside me with her usual efficiency, "the Times photographer is here for the feature story, and Senator Whitfield's office confirmed that the infrastructure bill passed committee with your regulatory framework intact. Also, there's a young woman here for the fellowship interview. She says she's been cleaning offices for 2 years while trying to find work as a CPA. The irony was perfect and painful. Another brilliant woman reduced to janitorial work because someone had decided her career deserved to be destroyed. Another story of professional assassination disguised as legitimate business practices. Another opportunity to transform personal devastation into systemic change. Send her to conference room A, I said. I'll meet with her personally. The fellowship program had been my brainchild, but it had grown into something larger and more comprehensive than I'd originally envisioned. We provided legal representation for professionals who'd been sabotaged, financial support during career rebuilding phases, and most importantly, investigative services that could expose the criminal conspiracies that destroyed careers with impunity. Our success rate was remarkable. 87% of our fellows had returned to their chosen professions within 18 months, often in positions superior to what they'd held before their careers were sabotaged. The other 13% had chosen different paths entirely, but they'd made those choices from positions of strength rather than desperation. The young woman waiting in conference room A looked exactly like I'd looked 2 years ago, professionally dressed but with the subtle signs of financial strain that came from being overqualified for every job you could actually get. Her resume was impressive: summa cum laude from Georgetown, CPA certification, 3 years of experience at a Big Four accounting firm before everything had fallen apart. Miss Thompson, I said, settling into the chair across from her, tell me about the incident that ended your career at Morrison and Associates. Her story unfolded with depressing familiarity. A supervisor who'd been stealing client funds had orchestrated her termination by framing her for the embezzlement, using her access credentials and forged documents to create an evidence trail. It led directly to her desk. The investigation had been swift and devastating, resulting in her firing, the suspension of her CPA license, and criminal charges that had eventually been dismissed but not before destroying her reputation in professional accounting circles. I've been cleaning offices for McKinsey & Partners downtown, she said, her voice carrying the same exhaustion I'd felt while emptying Marcus's trash cans. The partners there discuss their cases while I'm working, and I've noticed several accounting irregularities that suggest systematic client fund misappropriation. But who's going to believe a cleaning lady? The pattern was so familiar it felt like déjà vu. Brilliant professional reduced to menial work, continuing to notice the same crimes that had destroyed her career, but trapped in a position where her expertise was dismissed and her credibility was non-existent. Miss Thompson, I said, sliding a fellowship agreement across the table, how would you feel about becoming our newest investigative accountant? We'll provide full legal representation for the restoration of your CPA license, financial support during the investigation process, and when we're finished, McKinsey & Partners will either clean up their practices or find themselves explaining their client fund management to federal prosecutors. Her expression shifted from exhaustion to hope to determination in the span of 30 seconds. Another career reborn, another criminal conspiracy about to be exposed, another victory for the idea that systematic sabotage should have systematic consequences. The afternoon brought news that I'd been anticipating for months. Marcus's sentencing hearing had been scheduled for the following week. His plea agreement with federal prosecutors had resulted in a recommendation of 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and permanent disbarment from the practice of law. The judge would have the final say. But federal judges rarely rejected plea agreements that had been negotiated by prosecutors with conviction rates approaching 90%. Rachel's case had been more complex. Her cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in a reduced sentence, 18 months in minimum security prison, 2 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from working in any capacity that involved access to confidential business information. She testified against Marcus during the grand jury proceedings, providing details about their conspiracy that had eliminated any possibility of his claiming ignorance about the systematic nature of their crimes. But the most satisfying development had been the investigation into David Kellerman at Peterson and Associates. Once Marcus's case had established the pattern of criminal conspiracy, federal investigators had examined Kellerman's other activities and discovered that sabotage hadn't been his first foray into corporate espionage. 3 other lawyers had been framed for security breaches over a 5-year period, their careers destroyed to protect Kellerman's embezzlement of client funds that totaled over $2 million. Kellerman was now serving 12 years in federal prison, and the 3 lawyers he'd framed were all fellows in our recovery program, their careers rebuilt and their reputations restored through our legal intervention and investigative work. Dr. Chen, Margaret announced from the doorway, there's a call for you on line 1. Senator Whitfield wants to discuss the European Union trade agreement and your role as special counsel for international regulatory compliance. The call was brief but significant. The infrastructure bill I'd helped structure had created a new category of international regulatory specialist, and the State Department wanted to retain me as the primary consultant for treaty negotiations that would reshape global commerce relationships for the next decade. The position came with a salary that exceeded my equity partner earnings and a level of influence that would allow me to prevent the kinds of systematic professional sabotage that had nearly destroyed my own career. As evening approached, I found myself in the conference room where I'd first confronted Marcus 6 months ago, reviewing applications from potential fellows who'd been referred by lawyers, judges, and federal investigators who'd learned about our program through word of mouth. Networks that spread through professional communities like wildfire. Each application told the same story with different details. Brilliant professionals systematically destroyed by colleagues who'd stolen their work, supervisors who'd felt threatened by their competence, or family members who'd used personal relationships to orchestrate professional assassination. Accountants, engineers, doctors, consultants, and business analysts who'd been reduced to service jobs while their saboteurs advanced careers built on stolen intellectual property and manufactured scandals. The common thread wasn't just professional destruction but identity erasure, the systematic campaign to convince victims that their failures were personal inadequacies rather than criminal conspiracies, that their struggles were evidence of incompetence rather than sabotage, that their reduced circumstances were appropriate consequences for character flaws they'd never possessed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Jonna, it's Rachel. I get out next week. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for several minutes, processing the complex emotions that arose from contact with someone who'd participated in systematic betrayal but remained family despite the criminal consequences of her choices. Rachel had served 16 months of her 18-month sentence, with early release for good behavior and completion of a white-collar crime rehabilitation program. The question was whether reconciliation was possible with someone who'd accepted $430,000 to orchestrate her sister's professional assassination, then spent months pretending to offer emotional support while collecting payment for services rendered in career destruction. I deleted the message without responding, just as I'd done with the dozen previous attempts at contact she'd made through mutual friends, former colleagues, and distant relatives who didn't understand that some betrayals were too systematic and too deliberate to be forgiven through simple apologies or expressions of regret. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting the keynote speech I'd be delivering at the American Bar Association's annual conference next month. The topic: Corporate Sabotage and Professional Recovery, Creating Systematic Solutions for Systematic Problems. The audience would include 3,000 lawyers, judges, and legal scholars who would learn about the patterns of career destruction that operated throughout professional industries and the investigative techniques that could expose them. The speech would feature case studies from our fellowship program, legal strategies for prosecuting professional sabotage as criminal conspiracy, and policy recommendations for preventing the kinds of systematic career destruction that had nearly ended my own professional life. But it would also include something more personal: the story of a woman who'd been dismissed as just the maid by someone who'd stolen her career, then used that dismissal as motivation to build a foundation that would prevent similar sabotage from destroying other people's lives. The narrative arc was perfect: destruction leading to reconstruction, betrayal inspiring justice, personal devastation transformed into systematic change. The woman who'd cleaned Marcus's floors while he mocked her professional capabilities had become the architect of a movement that would protect thousands of other professionals from similar sabotage. At 9 p.m., I walked through the Chen Institute's offices, past conference rooms where tomorrow's fellows would learn investigative techniques, legal strategy, and the psychological tools necessary to rebuild careers that had been systematically destroyed. The building hummed with the quiet energy of institutional purpose, the kind of focused activity that characterized organizations built to solve specific problems rather than generate abstract profits. In the lobby, the evening security guard nodded respectfully as I prepared to leave. "Good night, Dr. Chen. See you tomorrow morning." The respectful acknowledgement was simple but profound, representing the kind of professional recognition that I'd almost lost forever when Marcus had orchestrated my career assassination. The guard saw me as Dr. Chen, executive director of a foundation that mattered, consultant to senators and international organizations, architect of policies that would reshape global commerce relationships. He didn't see me as just the maid, because that woman no longer existed. Replaced by someone who'd transformed personal devastation into systematic justice and individual recovery into institutional change. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with its usual evening energy. People rushing home from jobs that mattered, from careers that provided identity and purpose, from professional lives that hadn't been systematically sabotaged by criminal conspiracies disguised as legitimate business practices. Most of them would never experience the kind of professional assassination that had nearly destroyed me, but those who did would now have resources and support systems that hadn't existed before my own career had been rebuilt from the wreckage of Marcus's crimes. I walked the 6 blocks to my apartment, past the building where Marcus and Rachel had lived during the 2 years when they'd systematically destroyed my professional life for monthly payments that had totaled nearly $500,000. The penthouse lights were off now, the apartment empty since their federal convictions had necessitated selling their assets to pay restitution and legal fees. The building's doorman, the same one who'd watched me arrive in my cleaning uniform dozens of times, now greeted me with the kind of deference reserved for residents whose names appeared in newspaper business sections and whose professional achievements warranted respectful recognition. "Good evening, Dr. Chen. Congratulations on the Senate appointment. Very impressive." The Senate appointment. Special Counsel for International Regulatory Compliance, a position that would allow me to influence trade policies that affected billions of people while preventing the kinds of systematic professional sabotage that had nearly ended my own career. The woman Marcus had dismissed as someone who should stick to what she knew best, was now being consulted by governments on policies that would reshape international commerce for decades. In my apartment, I opened a bottle of champagne, not Dom Perignon, but a vintage that carried personal significance rather than status symbolism, and stood at the windows that overlooked the city where my career had been destroyed and rebuilt, where justice had been served and systematic change had been implemented. The taste was perfect, complex, sophisticated, and completely different from the harsh champagne Marcus had thrown in my face while dismissing me as just the maid. This was the taste of transformation, of careers rebuilt and criminals prosecuted, of systematic sabotage exposed and institutional change implemented. Tomorrow, I would meet with 15 new fellows who'd had their careers systematically destroyed, but who would leave our program with restored professional identities and the tools necessary to prevent future sabotage. Tomorrow, I would review policy recommendations that would protect thousands of other professionals from the kinds of criminal conspiracies that had nearly ended my own career. But tonight, I had champagne to finish and congressional testimony to review, and international regulatory frameworks to analyze for trade negotiations that would affect global commerce relationships for the next decade. The woman Marcus had called just the maid exactly 6 months and 14 days ago was gone, replaced by someone who'd transformed personal devastation into systematic justice, individual recovery into institutional change, and criminal sabotage into the foundation for protecting thousands of other professionals from similar destruction. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't just about prosecuting individual crimes. It was about creating systematic solutions that prevented those crimes from being committed against future victims. It was about transforming personal devastation into institutional change that would outlast the criminals who'd caused it. The taste of that transformation would linger for the rest of my life. As sweet and complex as perfectly aged champagne, as satisfying as justice served not just cold, but comprehensively, systematically, and with the kind of institutional permanence that made revenge an art form and recovery a movement that would protect countless others from the same systematic sabotage that had once nearly destroyed everything I'd worked to achieve. The story ended not with Marcus's destruction, but with something larger and more lasting, the creation of systematic solutions for systematic problems. The transformation of personal betrayal into institutional justice, and the birth of a movement that would ensure no one else would ever be dismissed as just the maid, while their careers were systematically sabotaged by criminals who mistook cruelty for cleverness and thought that professional assassination was a victimless crime. The legacy would outlive all of us, protecting professionals who hadn't even been born yet from sabotage techniques that were still being developed by people who hadn't yet learned that systematic crime required systematic consequences. That was the real victory, not just personal recovery, but permanent change that would echo through professional communities for generations to come. Perfect. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.